I'm Patsy Miller, a volunteer with the Martin County Historical Society. We're very privileged today to have our oral history from a local citizen, Dr. Bill Gray. Thank you for being with us today, Dr.
My
Gray.
pleasure.
Okay, you're on your own.
You're not going to ask me questions?
Yes, I'm gonna sit here.
Okay, that's good.
Now, where were you born, Dr. Gray?
I was born in Robertsonville, Martin County, North Carolina. April 21st, 1922.
And you were the first child of?
I was the first child of Enid Bennett Taylor and William Henry Gray Sr.
And what was Mr. Gray's livelihood?
He was a policeman, the fire chief, and a farmer.
What do you remember about those early years at home? You had a good family life.
I had a very good family life. Both my mother and my father had the privilege of going to college. So I grew up in a home that we discussed current events and history. My mother was very well educated.
And she kept well informed of current events.
Absolutely. We knew what was going on. I feel fortunate that I had the parents I had and the home that I lived in. They never questioned about what I did or where I was going as long as I behaved myself.
Who were your siblings?
I have one sister, younger than I am, Lula Gray Clark, lives in Corvallis, Oregon. I have a brother, deceased Aaron Taylor Gray. I have a younger sister, Nancy Gray Winslow. She lives in Greenville. We are still very close.
Excellent. So you have experiences from your early life carrying newspapers?
In my early life,
Yeah.
yes. I was born during the Depression. Everybody worked. I carried newspapers. I carried the Evening Telegram. That was the Rocky Mountain paper, which was the largest paper with the exception of the News and Observer. I carried that for several years. And I carried the Norfolk Ledger Dispatch. And I carried the Sunday edition of the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was about 3 inches thick, and that's the reason people bought it. And by the way, I carried those papers at first on a bicycle, and then we bought a pony, and I carried those papers on a pony for several years. My brother later took the route, and that route was 5 miles long. I actually went to the country a mile in one direction in one place. It was a long route. Sold a lot of papers.
What do you recall earning from all that work?
All that work?
Weekly income of what?
Well, I really don't know. But I know that on some months, there was a man who came around and collected the money once a month for each paper. There were months that I made more money than my daddy made. More money. Times were tight. I should have clarified that a little bit. I say I made more money. I made more money than he brought home at that time. Later he was paid the money that was owed to him. So that wasn't exactly right that I made more money, but I didn't make good money.
Was the town?
My mother wrote the social articles for the Evening Telegram, and that helped me a great deal. Everybody who got married or who did anything important wanted to buy the paper and see the picture in the paper or see the write-up. It helped a great deal.
So you had a pretty carefree school days, did you not?
Say that again?
Were your school days carefree?
Very much so. Too much so.
Can you tell me a little bit about those?
My school days? Well, I really wasn't interested in education. I really wasn't interested in studying. I didn't do what I should do. And my mother and father never pressed me on education. And everything that I did in life, it was left up to me. All my children, all my siblings were that way. Whatever we want to do, my mother and father let me do it, so long as I behaved myself. So I was interested in football, baseball, and basketball, and I was not a good athlete, and yet I enjoyed them all and played on the teams.
Was there a high school band at that time?
High school band? Sure, yes. During the Depression, there was a man who came to Robertsville as a barber, Mr. Fred Rogers. He played with the New York Symphonic Orchestra. He played with the Philadelphia Symphonic Orchestra. And he could take that violin, he could make it sing. He just absolutely, he was the finest musician you can imagine. His wife was a little short woman that was a concert pianist. They both were great musicians. I took music 6 days a week, 1 hour a day. I didn't take on Sundays. And I was supposed to practice 1 hour each day, as well as take that hour lesson. And I took them after school. They came out after to close the barber shop. But he was just an outstanding musician.
What instrument did you play?
I played the trumpet. Later on, there was a man, a retired Army bandmaster, who came to Robertsonville and took over the band. Mr. Fred Rogers didn't have a band, he just taught private lessons. Mr. Akins, formed a band. We had a nice band. We were in first place on 2 occasions. We went to Greensboro and we won, you know that they judged your bands by marching and by music and composition. Well, we won. Mr. Akins was a military man. We had to learn to march, that was for sure. And we won the first place in marching on several occasions, and we won composition of whatever the title they gave you in music, statewide. That was for our school. I'm sure larger schools like Charlotte had a different program and graded you different. I love music very much. In fact, I considered music as a livelihood at one time.
You got a good background. You still love music.
I love music very much. But I haven't picked up an instrument in over 65 years, so I don't play anymore. I regret that very much. I regret it.
Do you remember when World War II come along, and what happened to the band director, Mr. Akins?
I really don't know.
He went in the Army. He went in the Army.
Who?
Mr. Akins.
He was in the Army.
He was called back into the Army, and you remember who directed the Robertsville band?
His wife? Mrs. Akins. She played the trumpet.
She directed the band in his absence.
I didn't realize that.
You were gone maybe by that time, because you went into the military yourself.
Well, I was in school probably.
You went to school and then went to the military, right?
That's correct.
Tell us about your college.
My first year I went to what is now Barton College. It was then Atlantic Christian College. I went 1 year, and it was the finest thing that ever happened to me in my life, because I didn't do well in high school. I didn't study. I wasn't interested in college or studying. And that was sort of like going to a prep school. And then the next year I went to Wake Forest. And I think I was prepared to some degree to go to Wake Forest. If I had gone from high school to Wake Forest, I would have never made it.
You went to college when Wake Forest was in the village of Wake
I
Forest.
went to Wake Forest when Wake Forest was in the village of Wake Forest and had all the scholars, many scholars.
And then, what happened after that? Where did your education take for you next?
Well, the war, they began to draft people, and the war was coming along, so I went over to Raleigh and enlisted in the Navy. And I don't remember what year that was, but they lowered the draft age from 21 to 18. That's when I fell in the draft age, and that's when I went to Raleigh and enlisted in the Navy. After I didn't ever finish Wake Forest, I went 2.5 years. I liked a half a year having my master's, having my,
Bachelor's.
no, you wait a minute, having my career subjects,
Science.
science, that's right. And so the Navy came along and took all the men who were in my category and sent them to some college. They sent me to Chapel Hill. So I went for Chapel Hill for 1 quarter to finish my subjects in science. My major is what I'm trying to say, to finish my major. And from there, after that, they didn't know where to send us. Really, they had us, and they were going to send us to Great Lakes. And they lined us up there with a half a dozen buses out on the campus. And everybody was going to get on the bus and go to Great Lakes for boot camp. I don't know how many people were in that line, but this commander came along and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You stand over there." Well, I said, "Now what's going on here?" And I noticed he went along the line, he tapped a few more boys, "Stand over there, stand over there." So that's what we did. Well, after everybody else got on the bus, and that we were over there in this little pool. He said, "I want you to go in the middle now and go in room so and so, and I'll be in there in a minute." And he went in there. He told us, he said, "We're not going to send you to boot camp because you've had," I feel like I'm bragging, but I'm not. But he said, "I feel like you have your majors, you have too much education. I can use you now in some capacity in the Navy without sending you to boot camp." And that was fine. So they sent me to a convalescent hospital, and I was in the pharmacist in a convalescent hospital as a corpsman.
And what
Rolling
city was
pills.
that? What city was that, Bill?
That was in Asheville. Rolling pills, filling capsules, mixing cold medicine. Oh man, we mixed a lot of cold medicine with a lot of alcohol. They got well one way or the other. And I stayed there. Let's back up a minute. You see, in this meantime, I had already applied for dental school, and I was accepted in dental school. But when I found out when I was accepted, I wrote them a letter and told them I couldn't fill my obligation because I was in service and I wouldn't be going to school. And that was the end of it. Well, I was in the convalescent hospital, and the captain called me in one day. Said, "Come to my office right now." And I went to his office, and I thought, what have I done? And he said, "I want you to go pack your duffel bag, get everything you own, and put in your duffel bag, and we're shipping you out of here." Well, I didn't know what was going on, but that just didn't seem right. But then, while I was in his office, he called an ambulance driver. He said, get the ambulance out and have this boy on the ambulance in 10 minutes. Well, that didn't give me any time to do anything, but it didn't take long because I didn't have much to pack my duffel bag, my sea bag. And I was in that ambulance. He took me to the train station. He handed me a train ticket, a cabin, compartment, what do you call them?
Compartment.
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 Sleeping compartment.
Sleeping compartment. And it handed me some sealed orders. The sealed order says, report to the Naval Station in Richmond, Virginia. Well, in the hospital we wore whites all the time. We didn't wear blues. Well, in the wintertime you change from whites to blues. And they sent me to Richmond, Virginia. When I got off the train, it was snowing. I had whites on. Everybody else in the Navy that I saw on the streets had blues on. I had whites. And I didn't know where to go to the Naval Station, so I started asking people where was the Naval Station. They said, I don't know. Finally somebody said, well, there's a shore patrol station down here. So I went down to the shore patrol station. He said, you don't belong here. And I handed him a seal order and said, we don't have any word, but you're going to be here. And they said, go and there's a diesel school right outside of Richmond. So I went to the diesel school. And by the way, when I left Asheville, I didn't have enough money to buy a popsicle hardly. What little I had, and I called a taxi out there. I didn't know whether they were going to have enough money to get back or not. And when I to the diesel school, they said, well, you don't belong here either. So I was hungry. So I went and got in the chow line and found out that I was out of place. Said, man, you don't belong here. You can't eat here. Move on. Well, I was in a predicament, so I went back downtown. Then they told me there was another little place down the street that had some sailors, so I went down there with my sealed orders. Don't belong here. And I was sitting, didn't know where to go and what to do. And I met a friend of mine on the street, Joe Wade. He was my lab partner at Wake Forest. And I told him my situation. He said, come on, go home with me. He was in a rooming house, so that's where I spent the night with him. And that night, they decided they wanted to go to the movie. I said, Joe, I don't have any money, I can't go to the movie. They said, come on, I'll pay for it. So I left my sealed orders in his room. We went to the movie. When I came out, it was cold, it was snowing. I was the only sailor on the street that had whites on. And the shore patrol came along and picked me up and said, son, where's your blues? I said, I don't have any. And they took all my clothes away from me. I didn't have any blues. And he said, well, you wait right here. So he pulled me over there, and there's a little light pole, a street light pole there. So he handcuffed me to the light pole. He said, you stay right here. Black Betsy will be along in a few minutes and pick you up. So I stayed there, sure enough. And these old women will walk along the street there, and here I am in white, handcuffed to the pole. And they old women looked at me and said, that poor boy, that poor soul. I wonder what his mother knows. You know, it was comical to a point. Well, sure enough, I spent the first night in the brig, and I asked him to let me call some people. Wouldn't let me call. So I started I got kind of boisterous, because I wanted to get on the telephone. That man hit me on that head with that billy so hard, said, son, don't say another word. If you do, I'm going to really let you have it. Well, he taught me a lesson with that first knock. I didn't say anything else. But I was able to use the telephone the next morning and call Joe Wade and get things ironed out. But anyway, I didn't know where to go. And in the process, Joe Wade said, well, there's a bunch of sailors down there at the school. And I said, well, let's go down there. So I went down to the school. Joe Wade took me down to the school, to the Medical College of Virginia. And I went in, and that man says, son, where have you been for the last 3 days? I said, UAWOL. Said, we got to order out to capture you. I said, well, here I am. And he said, well, you were supposed to have been here 3 days ago. I said, yes, I've been looking for you. Well, the truth of the matter was, they were sending me to dental school, and I didn't know it. But I had been accepted several months before this, you know. But I didn't know what I was going to Richmond for. Had no idea. And they had a cadet program there. So the Navy sent me to dental school for the first few months. And then afterwards, they discharged us, and I went on my own. After I finished dental school, I didn't have enough money to go into practice, but you couldn't go into practice. You couldn't buy equipment. The war hadn't been over long enough for the manufacturers to start supplying people with equipment. You couldn't buy equipment. You couldn't find an office. Office space you just couldn't find it. It wasn't to be. But Dr. Kilpatrick in Robertsonville, a family friend, had asked me to come into practice with him before I graduated. And I thought that was fine, so I accepted that challenge. But there were boys getting out of the service who were in the same situation as I was, and people who had graduated like I had were in the same situation, couldn't find any place to go to practice. So there's a man over in Edenton, I forgot his name. Anyway, he went to see Kilpatrick and told him he just wanted to work. He'd work for nothing if he just let him go in the office. And so Kilpatrick, he went in and started working with Kilpatrick. But then, when it was time for him to leave, he didn't want to leave. So I was out of a place to go.
So Dr. Kilpatrick kept him on,
Kilpatrick kept him.
bumped you. Where did you go after you got bumped?
Well, I didn't do anything for several months. Sit around and just read a little bit and relax. But I think I needed it. And then after a couple of months or so, I got an offer to go and practice with a man in Pink Hill. And I took it up. And I went there and started with him.
You remember his name?
Edwards, Dr. Edwards, one of the smartest men I have ever known. He wrote several books. He published them, medical books, dental books.
Pink Hill is south of Kinston.
Say that again.
Where's Pink Hill located?
Where it's located? Pink Hill is in,
Lenore.
yeah, about 20 miles south of Kinston. Little small village of 300 people with several millionaires. A lot of wealthy people live there. They own the Ford place in the back of warehouses in Kinston, and wealthy people. It was a nice place to live.
How long were you there, Bill?
Oh, I didn't stay there very long. I stayed there about a half a year. And then I got a chance I was looking all along for a place in Williamson or a place in Tarboro. I had been to Edenton, Elizabeth City. I liked all those places, but they were all the same condition. But they were too far from home for me to travel often. But I was able to come to Williamson or to go to Tarboro at least once a week to check for office space and a place to practice, and to find out if the people would welcome me. First of all, you know, I went to Tarboro, and one man, he said, come if you want to, but I don't want you here. You know, so, you know, that kind of puts a damper on what you want to do.
How did you have your own car?
Did I have my own car? No. No, I didn't have a car. Listen, I came to Williamson and spent 6 months in Williamson before I was able to get a car.
Where did you live at that time in Williamston?
For the first 2 months, I rode back and forth from Williamson to my home in Robertsonville with Bruce Roebuck and with William Everett's brother, Bruce Roebuck.
And they both were in business in Williamston.
They both worked in Williamson, worked with the Dixon Motor Company.
And Bruce was with?
Dixon Motor Company. Bruce Roebuck was with the bank. Excuse me.
And he was later with? The oil
You
company.
see, Bruce lived with my grandmother, so I was. and
Which
Robert-
Bruce?
Huh?
Which Bruce?
Bruce Roebuck.
Okay.
Little Bruce Roebuck lived with my grandmother. And so I had known him for a long, long time. He lived in an apartment with my grandmother.
So he later married Anne Louise Mobley.
That's correct.
And Bruce Everett married,
Nancy Taylor.
and they continued to live in Robinsonville.
They both lived in Robinsonville. And Nancy, I met Nancy, Bruce Everett's children, two girls, at John Edward Boone's funeral last week, and he came over to me and said, "Are you kin to me?" I said, "Yes, I'm kin to you." And she said, "Well, my mother told me you were kin to me, but I didn't know this." So I tried to explain to him how we were kin on the Taylor side. My mother was a Taylor, and Nancy was a Taylor. I think they were maybe about third cousins.
Now, after you came to Williamston to live, where did you stay?
Where did I stay?
Where did you stay?
I stayed in Robinsonville for the first 6 months.
After that,
After that, I met this pretty little girl. I stayed with Mrs. Simon Manning. She had a boarding house. She had a few business people, had 3 businessmen who lived upstairs. And the downstairs was reserved for teachers. And she fed them supper every night. So I went there and lived with her. Mrs. Well, I can't think of her name now. Anyway, Mrs. Johnson, Miriam Johnson's mother. What's her name?
Carrie.
Miss Carrie Johnson. See, that's Miss Carrie Johnson's aunt. So Miss Carrie helped me get a place to stay there. A nice place to stay. I reckon one of the better places in town to stay. And my wife came in. I had been here for about 2 months, and my wife came in. She was teaching school here. And she came in, and I met her, and
Her name?
her name was Peggy Hopkins from Oak City. So we started to dating.
And what year was this?
Yes, let's see, 49,
48?
well, 47, 1948. 1948. She was teaching business, typing and bookkeeping and things. So we met and started seeing each other pretty frequent. So I found her, and we were married.
In a couple of years? You were married in a couple of years?
Yes, I expect so. Married in in 2 years, about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
A little less than 2 years. We were married. And our first place to stay was in this house right here.
And the name of this house is? Asa Big. Asa Big's house?
Asa Big's house. Yeah, Miss Sue Fountain. Miss Sue Fountain. We come to find out Miss Sue Fountain is kin to me. She told me all my history. Both of my grandmothers were Purvises. Miss Sue Fountain was a Purvis. Mildred Purvis ran the little florist, the big farm up there in Hamilton was her brother. And, but I lived here. And then I was here for approximately 2 years, and then we had the doctor's draft, and the doctor's draft called me back into service. So Peg and I went in service, it meant 2 years.
What was the occasion of that conflict? Do you remember the name of that war?
It was the Korean War. It was the Korean War. And, but I didn't go overseas. They didn't take anybody who was married and send them overseas in my outfit, in my group. But they needed us here. You know, it takes 8, I was in the Navy, and it takes 8 people on shore to support one person overseas. That doesn't sound right, but that's what it is. That's what it was then. But we lived a marvelous life during those 2 years in service.
Where did you live?
Where I lived, well, I first went to Beaufort, South Carolina, Paris Island. Stayed there for about a year, and then they transferred me to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. But I asked for the transfer because my father and Peggy's father both died the last year we were at Camp Lejeune. So we wanted to transfer so we could be closer to home, and that's what they did. So we spent the other remaining years in Camp Lejeune.
So you were glad to get out?
Yes, well, yes, I don't know. You know, we had a marvelous time in service. We had, everything was for young people. We could go anywhere for free. We could buy our supplies on base. Had all the entertainment we could ever ask for. The clubs. We had a good time. I wasn't particularly ready to get out of service, but, well, I was, but I knew that I had to get out if I wanted to practice dentistry as a civilian. So that's what we did.
At that point, did you come back to Williamston?
Came back to Williamson.
Where was your first office?
My first office was a little office down by the Marco Theater, right? There's a little office right beside the Marco Theater. That was my first office. And then I was here for about a year and started building Martin General Hospital. And Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Llewellyn came to see me and asked me would I like to go out there and have an office in that building, the clinic building. And I told them I would much love to do that. And so they built me a little office there. To be accredited, you had to have certain things in the hospital. One of the things that was required was a dental office. So I think that's one reason that I went out there, because I was a dentist and they provided a dental office for me. And it was the finest relationship, professional relationship I could ever dream of. They were just nice to me and took me in and I enjoyed it very, very much.
Did you have to pay any rent on that space?
Oh, yes, I had to pay rent, but it was very nominal. Very nominal.
So after you got settled in practicing here in Williamston, did your family start?
Peggy and I didn't have any children for 8 years. Not because we didn't want children. They just didn't come along. They just couldn't, nature didn't provide them for us. And then we had a boy, William Thomas Gray, and a daughter, Ellen Gray Modlin. 2 children we are proud of and enjoy very much.
Where was your home, your residence at that time?
Living
Your family home in Williamston?
in Williamson ran on Big Street. There's 3 sections to Big Street in Williamson. We're on the north end of Big Street,
Behind Wheeler Manning?
behind Wheeler Manning. And that's where we live. We lived there for, I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 years. And then the house came for sale up on the hill. And we weren't quite ready to build. And that was a nice house. Mr. Dred started and built that house. He had one daughter. His daughter left and went to college. And he and his daughter lived in that house. And his daughter says, I can't live here. It's just too much house for me. I just said, you and I. So they sold that house and moved out and built a smaller house out close to Lawrence East and Lilies, out in on the south side. And that's where I'm still living.
Is that Grace Street?
Grace Street.
So,
When we first moved there, the high school was over there.
Right.
And there was just the high school and the elementary school. There was no middle school. And my wife, my children could get out and walk to that school and never cross the highway. And that was nice. My wife would get up and walk across the street. He was at school. But she taught school, and when the children got a little older, she quit. And during that time, she decided she'd go back to school and get a degree in library science. So when she got that, she never went back to high school. She was a elementary library science teacher, and that she enjoyed very much. That was her thing.
You and Peggy were a member of a card club called a couples club
Oh,
or
yes, we had-
bridge
yes.
club or?
Yes, we belong to a couples bridge club. Dr. Rhodes, Llewellyn, Christians.
You mean, Sophie and, Monk Critcher?
Roger Critcher.
Roger Critcher.
Roger Critcher. Elmer Critcher. Elmer Critcher, his wife, and Mrs. Jean Rhodes were master bridge players. What you call them, masters? Don't you? You know, you play so much you get points, and both of them.
Excel, did
But they still played with us and enjoyed it, I think, even though they were just master bridge players.
Was that your supper club as well?
No, that wasn't a supper club. But we served nice hors d'oeuvres at the bridge club. But yes, later on we joined the supper club. And we went out, at first, we went out in the country to a little farmhouse where we cooked and just enjoyed each other.
Is that the Slade Farm?
Clyde Griffin's farm. He had a house, a tenant house he fixed up. I think J.C. White furnished the heat for it. Mr. Cord did some wiring for it. And a lot of people put money in it to fix that old farmhouse up. But he's very liberal with people who wanted to use it. And he paid all the expenses.
Did you ever go to that little, wintertime, let's see, houseboat that was tied up on the Roanoke River? The men would go there about once or twice a week to eat.
That was the Houseboat Gun Club,
Right.
hunting club. I was not a member, but I went and ate with them several times and played. And the houseboat, finally they had to move it, and they moved it down the river and tied it up. Now I think it eventually sank, I don't know, but anyway, it decommissioned.
The cook there was from Nags Head, was it?
No, I think he was from, I don't know, but he cooked at Nags Head. He cooked at Arlington,
The Old Arlington Hotel.
the old Arlington Hotel, he cooked there. Jim, his name was Jim, I don't remember his last name. Ollie.
Jim Olive.
Jim Ollie. Jim Ollie. That's right.
Let me ask you something about your early life after you were grown and in Robertsonville. Who were some of your friends, your guy friends in Robertsonville?
Well, we have to go back and open the history book because they all did. Winston Carlisle, Joe Ward, Ned Everett, Roscoe Everett. Joe Winslow probably was my closest friend. Russell Roebuck, his daughter lives across the street from me now.
You remember Joe Ward?
Sure do, was very close. Winston Carlisle.
Who lived on your street? That was such a wonderful neighborhood.
On my street,
Your Green Street.
on one corner, Dr. Ward and his 5 children. Then the mayor was Everett, and his son, who taught me in grammar school,
Marvin Everett.
Marvin Everett, that's right. Next to him was the Baileys, Jack Bailey. His father ran a grocery store in Robertsonville. Next to him was Mr.
Jack Taylor?
Jack Taylor, thank you very much. Jack Taylor. And next to him was the Everett with our 4 children, Mildred Roscoe, Nunn Jr., and Ned, and then my house. Across the street was Jenny Osborne and her family, Little Rat Osborne, Jim Gray, his family. Later on, Peggy Gray moved across the street in the Bailey house. Down the street was Charles Wilson.
Louise Wilson?
And Louise Wilson. Let's don't leave her out. Louise was a nice lady. Very nice lady.
She's living in Oregon.
Say that again.
Louise, who were we talking about? Louise, who were we talking about just then? I've already drawn a blank. Who were we talking about, Bill?
My problem is I don't hear very well, but that's all right.
All right, you know Louise Wilson is dead.
Louise Wilson,
Yeah.
sure.
And your sister,
Lula Purvis.
Lula Purvis lives on the West Coast.
That's right.
Nana Gray lives in Chapel Hill.
Lives in Chapel. That's my cousin.
Right.
Nana and I are cousins.
How about Beatrice Vick? She was mighty pretty. And Lucille Cox.
Oh, yes. Lucille.
And Lois Green.
Carlisle Cox.
You had a good group.
The very best. I had a wonderful childhood life. We playing and getting together. You know, when we were coming along, we didn't have a special girl that we dated. We was to get together and all pile in the car or go to the house. Doris Wilson, you live across the street from Doris. You remember? She used to get all these people to come, says, come on, we're gonna go around my house and dance on the front porch tonight. You were there.
Yeah, I would slip over there where y'all dancing.
That's right. And we just didn't have any special girls that we went out with. We had a favorite, of course, but we didn't rely on our entertainment for one special girl. We went in groups. But first of all, we didn't have a lot of cars. We couldn't go any places. We'd get one car, you know, and take as many people as we could and go somewhere to the drugstore, to the store, to the little dance hall down.
There wasn't a whole lot of money either.
Not a lot of money, that's right. Didn't need a lot of money. Didn't we?
Well, you know, at that time, growing up in a small town, it was very free to roam the town.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Tell me about the job you had with R.L. Smith and Company.
Oh, yes, okay, yes. When I finished high school, I applied for a job at R.L. Smith and Son, which was a large department store and hardware store in Robertsonville. And about 2 weeks before I was go to work there, I was working with Mr. Allen Osmond in the tobacco field. And a little boy out at Crossroads, we got in a fight. He beat the living tar out of me. He rolled me over on the back of the truck and on the ground and broke my arm. Well, that was bad. And so the little boy, he didn't mean to do it. We were just playing. We weren't mad or anything. And but anyway, I was really wanting to go off to college. But I didn't go because I just felt like I couldn't go with this arm all tied up in a cast and everything. So I went to work with R.L. Smith and Son, but I had already applied for a job there. And I worked there with Mr. Irvin Smith and Mr. Willie Johnson. They were my step parents. They were as good to me as it could be. Gilbert Smith. I want to tell you a story about Gilbert one time. Gilbert loved to do a little of everything. They had more hobbies. Gilbert and Irvin had more hobbies than any 10 men in the county. They flew airplanes, they did everything. Well, Gilbert was in bees. I was working with Mr. Smith, and I was said something to Gilbert about the bees, you know, and I told him I wouldn't mess with bees. I didn't want to get stung and all this stuff. He said, well, boy, you don't know anything about bees. I said, well, I'm not afraid of them. I just don't want to work with them. He said, yes, you were afraid of them. I said, I'm not afraid of them. I'm not. He wanted me to go around and help him in his beehive, and I refused to go. So the next week, here comes a package from the bee people. Inside was a hive of bees. They came in something about as big as a Karo syrup can. Oh, about a foot long, so big around. And Gilbert says, here are your bees, let's see how afraid you are of them. But man, I didn't know what to do. I could have fallen through the floor. But he not only did he have the bees there, and these bees in a little wire cage inside of a box. And the queen is in a little capsule of her own. And all the bees around this queen bee. And Gilbert had went out and had already got me a hive to put them in. You know, the box to put them in. Call them hives and supers. And I said, well, Bill, I'm working. I can't go get the bees, messing with the bees today. He said, don't worry about it. I've already talked to Papa. Papa said you could have the afternoon off and go look after your bees. So, man, I was in a dither. And he said, here's a little book. A little book came with the bees too, you know, what to do. So here's a little book. Said you're going to have time to read them. And you go around and if you have troubles, you call me. Well, let me tell you. I took those bees and I went home. I could have fallen a well and been happy. But before nightfall, I had those bees in that hive and I had them humming good. And you don't, when you put them in the hive, you close it up so they can't get out. You wait a day or two for them to get that natural sense of who they are and where they are so they won't go off someplace. But I got those hives started, you know, and I finally got up to 6 hives of bees before I went off to college. And when you had honey, I had honey and I sold it honey for 15 cents a pound, 2 pounds for a quarter. And after I went off to college, my father gave the bees to Mr. Calvin, the old primitive Baptist preacher out at Beargrass.
So what kind of salary did you make at R.L. Smith and Company? What kind of what were your earnings at R.L. Smith?
$10 a week. But let me tell you, that was good. People on the farm, farmers had tenants. They kept them in the little houses they had out there, and that's about what they made. And they had that $10 would pay for the whole, would keep a whole family, children and all. That was a lot of money. $10 a week. That was more than $1 a day. We didn't make but a dollar on the tobacco fields and out on the farm. $1 a day was about as much as you made.
So what did Papa offer you when you got a chance to go to college?
I don't know what you said, but I saved it.
What did Mr. Bob offer you when you got ready to go to
When I
college?
decided to go to college, I went to tell Mr. Bob I was going to college. He said, son, don't go. I'll double your salary. $20 a week. Man, let me tell you, I could do anything I want to do with $20 a week. But his son Irvin and Mr. Johnson told me, said, don't you do it. Don't you do it. When I thought to myself, well, Irvin, your daddy's going to do this to me, and told me he would start me off, double my salary, and I could expect another increase in a few months. And he said, don't worry about that. You go off to college, when you come back, I'll triple your salary. And
Tell me what kind of property owner Mr. Bob was.
store owner?
What kind of man was Mr. Bob?
Mr. Bob was a nice man, but he
Ran a tight ship?
run a tight ship. He run a tight ship. He didn't tell you when he was leaving the office or leaving the store, except he would say, he'd walk out and say, look, watch the back door, watch the back door now, watch the back door and front door. And you knew where he was going. He was going to come over to Williamson here to a ball game. He loved baseball. And so he'd come over and offer. Yes, he was tight. He ran a tight ship. He was strict on his children. Gilbert Smith had had graduated from State College with a electrical degree, electrical degree.
Electrical engineer?
Had a nice job at Westinghouse. Mr. Bob wanted to come home. So it actually just got on him and just about made him come home. That was terrible. Well, he should have stayed where he was. But I'm going to tell you something else about Mr. Smith. I know for a fact that Mr. Smith would, during the Depression, Miss Sally, his wife was Miss Sally, and they would take up money. And the reason I know so much about it is because Miss Sally would come to my mother's house and said, Ian, I want you to take this money and take it to such and such and give it to them, or go buy some groceries and take it, but don't tell them where the money came from. Now you cannot let them know where it came from. They did that all the time. Mr. Bob running a store like your granddaddy, and they loaned out a lot of money over the years to keep people going, to financing a whole year. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people lost their farm. They just couldn't make it. Mm-hmm. And they lost them. And your daddy fits in the same category, your granddaddy. I never used Mr. Bob Smith to take a farm from a man.
When did they get this farm down here that the Robinson brothers live on? Outside of Williamston.
Okay. Miss Carrie Lee Everett, Remus Everett's wife, they owned a farm out at somewhere, Spring Green. No, they didn't own the farm. The farm was Mr. Smith's farm. Well, Mrs. Everett inherited this farm outside of Williamson Hill. They came down and lived 1 or 2 years. I don't know how long they lived. But Mrs. Everett went to see Mr. Smith and said, Mr. Smith, I own that farm down there and it's mine, but it's not my home. My home is your farm over there, out going towards the Platform Church. Said, will you trade me? And he traded them. So Mr. Smith got the farm down here, and she got the farm going out towards Platform Church. That's how
Or Spring Green, or Flats Farm.
What?
Did you say Spring Green?
I said Platform.
Flats Farm.
Platform. But that was Mrs. Everett got that farm.
Caredale's mother.
That's right. That's right. And I think this farm actually was a little larger than the one that she traded Mr. Smith for. And they knew that. Mr. Smith wasn't trying to outdo her, but she said the other was home, and she wanted to move back home. But people like your granddaddy and Mr. Bob Smith, they did not take advantage of people who were losing their land during the Depression. Mm-hmm. They really tried to help them. And they stood behind them at the banks. They controlled the banks. Your granddad and Mr. Smith and 2 or 3 more controlled the banks.
H.G. Norman?
That's the reason the banks didn't go busted in Robertsonville. Didn't fold under them. Because they had men like Mr. Smith backing them.
Right.
And your granddaddy.
Right. It never closed, the bank in Robertsonville.
Never closed the bank in Robertsonville, that's right. And that was the reason for it. I remember when I was working there with Mr. Smith during the Depression, I saw a report one time from Standard & Poor's. I didn't know what Standard & Poor's was until somebody brought me this sheet of paper showing me. And Mr. Smith's credit at Standard & Poor's was $1 million. My gracious, you could take $1 million and buy all of Martin County.
That was in the Depression.
And I don't know what Yates, Robinson and Sons was worth, but you know they were worth it in the same comparison with that.
Probably.
And it just, I could not even imagine that. But I would say that, to my knowledge, they did not take advantage of people who owed them money. They were very generous with their wealth.
They were time merchants. They were
They were time merchants. Well, they had to be.
extended credit to the farmers until they harvested
They would
their
go
crops.
they would go to your granddaddy's store and they get a little booklet each week. And they had made a deal with them, okay, I want $10. I want $10 a week so I can live. And so they have a little coupon. So you go in the store and you tear out a coupon and get what you wanted. And that's what, and then they charge you extra for that. In other words, they had to pay back 20 cents on the dollar.
Well, Dr. Gray, it's been very fine having you as a guest and sharing with us your oral history. And the Martin County Historical Society thanks you very much. I hope we'll see you soon.
Well, I thank you very much for having me because it's been a pleasure bringing back memories.
Yeah, that's what we're about.